Okay, so welcome back. This is topic 1.6, developments in Europe. This is still Unit 1, the global tapestry of your AP World curriculum. So here is a quick snapshot. We're looking at Europe in the High Middle Ages. So a quick snapshot of European borders and boundaries in the High Middle Ages. Now, it's important to note there will be many changes to these boundaries through various conflicts to come. So take a look at what they are now, and you're going to see as we progress in this course how they are constantly changing. So we've got a few different thematical learning objectives for you to focus on in this section. We're going to focus on the P, the C, and the S from our SPICE-T acronym, governance and politics, culture, and then social interactions. So by the end of this lecture, the three things I want you to be able to accomplish is explain how the beliefs and practices of the predominant religions in Europe affected European society. I also want you to explain the causes and consequences of political decentralization in Europe from 1200 to 1450. And then lastly, be able to explain the effects of agriculture on social organization in Europe from 1200 to 1450. Historically at this time, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and the core beliefs and practices of these religions continued to shape societies in Europe. Europe was politically fragmented and characterized by decentralized monarchies, feudalism, and the manorial system. Europe was largely an agricultural society dependent on free and coerced labor, including serfdom. So let's go ahead and begin here by looking at the Middle Ages timeline. The decline of the Roman Empire happened in the 5th and the 6th centuries, but most historians agree the specific date of 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, marks the end of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire continued through the rule of the Byzantine Empire into the Middle Ages. Now, the term Middle Ages and medieval can be interchangeable. The Middle Ages begins when the fall of the Roman Empire and extends to the Renaissance, sometime between 13 and 1400 CE. The Middle Ages can be broken down into two general parts: the Early Middle Ages and High Middle Ages. The Early Middle Ages are characterized by the fracturing of power after the fall of the Roman Empire. Many smaller kingdoms appear that are often at war with each other. The term Dark Ages is often used to describe this period of European history because there was a decline in education and trade. The High Middle Ages marks a turning point in Europe with intellectual pursuits and trade began to pick up again. It is the transition period between the Early Middle Ages and the Renaissance. For this unit, we are primarily concerned with the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So I want you guys to think about this for a second. Take a guess at what the major continuity throughout this time was. The answer is going to be on the next slide. The Roman Catholic Church. As we see throughout this topic, the Roman Catholic Church is very tightly intertwined with everyday life. The Church remains a constant throughout the change of this period. The Church was able to maintain its power and influence because it had such a developed and sophisticated system of governance. Pictured here is Pope Boniface VII, where he was Pope from 1294 to 1303. And he's also pictured with his cardinals. We also need to know about European feudalism. land for loyalty. Government in the Middle Ages was largely decentralized and was based on land ownership. Kings owned vast amounts of land and distributed parts of it, called fiefs, to nobles or lords. Lords in turn would grant some of their land to knights, who would then pledge their loyalty to the lord and the lord's king, while offering protective services. Lords would also offer land and the protection of their knights to the lowest class, the peasants, who had to work the land and provide the lord with crops and livestock harvested from the land. When the king gave land to a lord, the lord became the vassal to the king. Now remember, a vassal is someone who owes service to someone of a higher status. Knights also became vassals to lords in this system. So let's talk about the manorial system. Large estates that were self-sufficient were called manors, which is where the term manorialism comes from, or where it's derived at least. A manor functioned like its own city. On the map on the slide, I want you to pay attention to where the manor house is in the bottom center. This would be the central grand house, or sometimes a castle, on the land that houses the lord or noble who own the land. The serfs who worked the land, the striped white and yellow portions on the map, lived within the manor and did not leave. Everyone who needed to live was housed within the bounds of the manor, which was often surrounded by stone walls. Serfs made up approximately 3/4 of the population of the medieval population. They were not slaves, but they were tied to the land. The children of serfs were also born into serfdom. So what is the difference between feudalism and manorialism? Well, land is central to both feudalism and manorialism, and the two systems could exist simultaneously. The major difference in the two systems is that feudalism is political in nature and describes the relationship between a king and everyone under him. Land is exchanged for military service and loyalty to the king. Manorialism, on the other hand, is more economic in nature and describes the more closed system of the manor where the lord controls the land and peasants working the land. So it's an agrarian society. As a result of the fractured nature of Europe with its feudal and manor systems, was that society was heavily centered around land and agriculture. Land ownership was the key to power and influence. This agrarian society was dependent on the labor of serfs, who are peasants who were tied to the land and did the bulk of the labor of producing food for both themselves and the higher members of society. And pictured here, we see peasants harvesting wheat in medieval Europe. Power shifts in Europe. This is a macro, like a much larger view of major power shifts in the Middle Ages. The early Middle Ages, fall of the Roman Empire to 1000 CE, marks the time of small feudal kingdoms. At the beginning of the High Middle Ages, there is a shift in power to monarchs. Certain monarchs were able to consolidate power, and Europe began to shift away from the fractured feudal system of the early Middle Ages. These kings developed bureaucracies, which we know are crucial to governing a large state or empire, as well as standing armies. This is a shift from the feudal system of knights that fell under the lords in the feudal social hierarchy. With bureaucracy and standing armies, monarchs or kings could wield much more power and control much more land. Then, in 1210, the signing of the Magna Carta marks a power shift back to the noble class. Unhappy with King John's policy, nobles in England wanted to stop the absolute power that the king held. This resulted in the drafting and the signing of the Magna Carta, which in short placed everybody, including the king, under the same set of laws. It represented a major power shift. So powerful monarchies begin to emerge. While we won't go into detail about all of the kingdoms gaining power in this time period, it is important to know that many kingdoms became more centralized behind a powerful king. Governments moved away from the feudal system towards powerful monarchies in Western Europe, which began to take the shape of many of the modern-day European countries we know today. The kingdoms of England and France are two examples of kingdoms that rose to power during this period. Okay, at this time, I want you to pause the slideshow and go follow the link in the description to watch the video on the Magna Carta. Take a few minutes, watch the video, and when you're done, come back to this slideshow and write these questions into your notebook and answer them. Number 1, what did the barons demand of King John? 2, although the Magna Carta granted the right for people to be judged by their peers, who was excluded from this law? And number 3, what is one of the Magna Carta's most important legacies? So make sure you have those 3 questions in your notes because we will go over them in class. Okay, so moving on from the Magna Carta, this takes us to the 100 Years' War. The term 100 Years' War was not actually used at the time of these conflicts, which comprised the 100 Years' War. This war was not one continuous war, but rather a series of war with truces in between these conflicts. These conflicts arose from 2 major issues. 1, English land held within France, which made the English landholders vassals to France, and 2, disagreements over the succession to the French throne after the death of Charles IV, who died in 1328, who had no male heir. This war is considered to be the most significant war of the Middle Ages. The effects of the 100 Years' War were innovations in military technologies which would shape later wars to come. This period of conflict also helped to develop a deep sense of nationalism, which continues into later European history. So pictured here on this slide is the assassination of Louis I, who was the Duke of Orleans in 1407. So let's examine technology in the 100 Years' War. While the 100 Years' War, it marked a revolution in military weapon and tactics that would drastically change the landscape of warfare in Europe. One major development was large standing armies. Recall from feudalism that military support came in the form of knights and peasants who were given land by lords in exchange for military support. With the growing power of monarchies, standing armies employed by a king changed how military campaigns played out. The use of cannons and artillery changes warfare dramatically. Cannons were extremely effective against the longbow and other handheld weapons that were dominant in European warfare prior to the 100 Years' War. In addition to larger armies and new weapons, the military tactics of chevauchée came into use by the English. This was a method of destroying farms and rural areas that were needed to support the French military. Instead of attacking the opposing military directly, the goal was to cripple the support system of the military and demoralize the entire population instead. This was a brutal method of warfare associated with pillaging, burning crops, murdering peasants, theft, and rape. I want you to take a moment to think about this question. How did the cannon come to Europe? Where did that come from? I want you to think about that for a second. Okay, So, if you pause this and you thought about that for a second, you should recall that gunpowder, where did it come from? Well, it arrived in Europe from China in the 14th century, and it was a critical component to the development of guns and cannons at this time. So this traces back to what we talked about in the first section in 1.1. Pictured here is the very first depiction of the use of cannons in Europe. This is a scene from the Siege of Orleans in 1429. So we get the Great Schism of 1054. We mentioned earlier that one constant throughout all of this major change in Europe was the Roman Catholic Church. Christianity was a major influence on the lives of Europeans across all social levels and across different kingdoms. Before we dive a little further into religion in the High Middle Ages, we need to backtrack just a little to the Great Schism, also called the East-West Schism of 1054. Tensions between the Roman Catholic Church in Rome and the Byzantine Church in Constantinople, which is present-day Istanbul, resulted in the splitting of the church into two distinct branches. We have Western Catholicism, which is Roman or Latin, and Eastern Orthodoxy, which is Greek. On the map on this slide, the thick pink line is the dividing point between these two branches of Christianity. The reason for this split was a mix of religious disagreements and political conflict. The church remains split to this day, with Roman Catholicism having about 1 billion followers and the Eastern Orthodox Church having about a little over 250 million followers. As we look at this time period and beyond in Europe, there will be more splits within the Christian belief system. The Great Schism was the first of many splits. So let's examine religion in Europe between 1200 and 1450 a little closer. The three major religions that shaped European society at this time were Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. As we just discussed, Christianity was broken into two branches after the Great Schism: Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. Christianity as a whole was found all over Europe at this time. You may recall from topic 1.2 that Islam had a presence in Spain, which at this time was known as Iberia. Muslim rule in this region extended from the early 700s to 1492. More details about Muslim rule in the Iberian Peninsula will be discussed later. Jewish communities were found in various places throughout Europe, but represented the minority. Differing religious beliefs centered around several conflicts of this time period. So we got the Reconquista of Spain. Muslims ruled parts of the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain, beginning in 711 with conquests by the Umayyad Caliphate. Pictured on this map is the Caliphate of Cordoba circa 1000 CE. Muslim rule of the Iberian Peninsula ended in 1492 when the Catholic monarchs Isabella I and Ferdinand II defeated the Nasrid dynasty and took back the territory that was Granada Emirate. This conflict is known as the Granada War and marks the end of the Reconquista. Reconquista is a term coined by later historians to describe the ongoing conflicts between Catholics and Muslims over control of the Iberian Peninsula. Pictured is Saint James, known as the Moor Slayer, who fought against Muslims early in the Reconquista. And this is going to take us right into the Crusades. While most of the Crusades occurred before 1200 and 1450 time period, it is worth noting the ongoing conflict between Christians and Muslims and other groups. The original Crusades were holy wars waged by Christians to take back the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the city of God, was the place where both Jesus and the prophet Muhammad engaged in their teachings, marking the city as an important religious site for both Christians and Muslims. These conflicts were usually directed or sanctioned by the Pope. The Crusades later expanded to the more general war against any enemies of the Christian faith in and around Europe. Both Muslims and Jews were targets of these wars. There were 8 total crusade expeditions between the years 1096 and 1291. And pictured here is the siege of Jerusalem during the First Crusade in 1099. And this is an oil painting by Émile Signal in 1847. So what is the influence of religion in medieval Europe? Religion, and specifically Christianity, could not be separated from life in the High Middle Ages. All social classes, from peasants and serfs all the way up to kings, were heavily influenced by the church. Now recall from our look at manorialism that each manor typically had a church within its walls. This is a great example of the centrality of Christianity, even in places geographically distant from Rome, the center of the Roman Catholic Church and home to the Pope. Pictured left, 13th century Byzantine mosaic of Christ from the Eastern Orthodox Church. Pictured on the bottom, middle, a 1433 painting of the journey of the Magi, the 3 wise men going to see the birth of Jesus Christ. And pictured bottom right, Notre Dame in Paris, whose construction began in 1163. Sorry. Okay, you guys can go ahead and just read through this primary source analysis. Be familiar with it, but we will be taking a closer look at this in an activity in class. So I'm not going to say much about it here other than just, read through it, be familiar with it. We will take a look at it closer in class. So the end of the Middle Ages. The time period 1200 to 1450 in the global tapestry unit puts Europe squarely in the High Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages represent a transition period in which Europe began to move towards the Renaissance as trade and intellectual advancements grew. The Renaissance period in Europe was the rebirth of art, culture, politics, science, and literature. The driving force of this rebirth was the revisiting of classical Greek philosophy. Humanism begins to take shape in the early Renaissance period, in which focus moves away from the Christian God and onto the individual. This is seen in art and literature, philosophy, and politics of the Renaissance. And that takes us to our topic 1.6, key ideas for review. So once again, as I've stated in all the other lectures, make some notes for yourself to use as review for the exam. These right here on this slide, these are the major ideas that you need to be well versed in at a bare minimum for this course and for any of the tests coming up. So please make sure to write these down and study these. Make sure you know these key ideas from all the lectures going forward. Thank you. Have a good night.